my pleasure to introduce Rachel Blake, Associate Director at Regional Housing Legal Services. Rachel joined Regional in May 2007 after more than 5 years working in private practice in Pittsburgh, where she developed expertise in real estate, nonprofit, and affordable housing matters. Rachel currently spends her time on policy and communication projects at Regional, including foreclosure prevention initiatives, increasing energy efficiency in affordable multifamily properties and low-income communities, and accelerating the incorporation of data and technology into housing policy discussions. It's my pleasure to introduce Rachel. Rachel?
Hello. Thanks, Joyce. So like Joyce said, my name is Rachel. I'm at Regional Housing Legal Services, and I am so happy that so many of you have joined us on this call today. I think it's going to be fantastic. The presentation that you're going to hear from Ira in just a couple of minutes is about an incredibly important topic. Inclusive communities and displacement issues are vital, and he's going to be talking to you about this really amazing tool that they've developed at Reinvestment Fund to help you identify neighborhoods that are most at risk of displacement, and I think you're going to be seeing some examples of that tool applied in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh, so it's going to be very interesting. I'm here providing a greeting to you as a member of a group that we call the Data Collaborative. We're a handful of intermediary-type organizations, not all strictly intermediaries, but we're kind of in that space. And we've been working together for a number of years with Reinvestment Fund to work on ways to bring data and quantitative analysis more front and center in our policy and advocacy activities. So this tool that you're going to hear about from Ira was developed in connection with the Data Collaborative, but we absolutely hope that people who are working on inclusive communities and on displacement issues will use the tool in whatever way that they're sort of working on the issue. We know that direct service providers could find it helpful to design and target programs, that community organizers might use it to inform campaigns that they're running, and certainly funders and government agencies could use it to, for long-term planning that they're doing related to housing, or if you're doing displacement or affordable housing issues, it could be really informative in all of that kind of work. So we really hope that you'll be able to follow up on the information given here and really kind of accelerate the value of this tool. So with that, let me tell you just a couple things about Ira. He's the president of Policy Solutions at Reinvestment Fund, a results-oriented, socially responsible community investment group. He's conducted detailed spatial and statistical analyses in cities across the country, and those studies then are often used by local governments to craft policy responses and to allocate scarce resources based on local market conditions. He's also done studies of mortgage foreclosures and abusive lending practices, much of that being used to support civil rights and consumer protection litigation brought by federal, state, and local governments. He also has been working on equity of access to fresh food retail, childcare, and healthcare. In addition, for more than 25 years, he's been a lecturer for the University of Pennsylvania's Urban Studies program. So without further ado, Ira, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Joyce. Again, my name is Ira Goldstein. I'm here with my colleague, Colin Whiting, and this is the work that I'm going to present today is work that we've done together here at Reinvestment Fund over the last year or two. I will say that this is really sort of an evolution and an adaptation of some work that we were involved in way long time ago when Philadelphia was going through a very early wave of community-based activity around issues related to gentrification. But sort of the world has evolved, technology has gotten better, and we've been able to sort of, I think, create a better and more useful tool to be able to pick up on some of the phenomena. So as Rachel said, we are from an organization here called Reinvestment Fund. We are a Treasury certified community development financial institution, or CDFI. We've been around over 30 years at this point, and we are proud to have made over $1.7 billion of investments in affordable housing and childcare and arts and culture space and all the things that communities need to be vital and healthy communities. The funding that we get for our lending activity comes from a lot of individual investors, many like yourselves, who receive a promissory note for your investment in us, and we take and use those dollars to create all those things that I described earlier to finance it. As well, funding comes from financial institutions that, for example, might make investments with us because of the CRA credit for which they'd be eligible with those investments, or foundations or governmental entities and the like. So that's who we are. We have a real interest in ensuring ultimately that there are an appropriate set of tools and financing vehicles, again, ultimately to make sure that, that communities are vital, healthy, and equitably served communities. So this particular piece of work that we're going to talk about today, we sort of created along with our efforts related to the data collaborative that Joyce and Rachel mentioned. I want to be real clear that although some of it came up through a series of gentrification-related discussions, I don't want to present today what we have as a measure of gentrification per se. There's some terrific work that's been out there for a bit, some more recent than others, so out of Berkeley, out of the Fed here in Philadelphia, where people have done like a remarkable job that really sort of gets into the richness of the multidimensional aspect of what gentrification is, picking up on its demographics and its economics and its housing price implications and its culture aspects and its land use issues and things like that. But what we did was not really related to that. What we did was really try and focus more on not creating the perfect measure of gentrification itself, but understand what markets might look like as there's pressure on the existing residents to be able to sort of hold on to their residency in communities as they change. So again, this is not about measuring gentrification per se. It's really more about measuring what the implications of it are. In particular, what we're interested in is the sort of assessing the risk of the involuntary displacement that may occur as a result of gentrification. What we basically do to do this work is, we pick a particular start year. In the instance of the work that we're going to show you today, we go all the way back to 2000. We establish income levels at that time in places, and we allow income only to change along with the consumer price index. And we do that rather than bringing in new income data, because new income data reflects new people. And what we want to do is measure something that really looks at a population at a particular point in time and how the world around them has changed, or how the world around people just like them economically has changed. And thereby, the critical aspect of this really is holding on to that sort of early income information. What we then do is we create 2-year moving averages of home sale prices, and we're using actual sale transactions to do this, over those income ratios. And then we look at how those ratios change over time. The one piece that is a little bit of I think, an improvement over what we did, way back in the early 1990s on this, in the 1980s, was that we recognized as we were doing this work that many property markets, Philadelphia, like many others, experienced a housing bubble, right? So you go into the 2005, 6, 7 time period. I'll show you a picture of it in a moment. The prices really just sort of inflated. And I know it's sort of hard to find what a bubble is, and people sometimes, like pornography, say we know a bubble when we see one. But when you can look at the trend in these sale prices, you can see that sort of, rapid growth and rapid contraction of those prices. And certainly in retrospect, you can see it as a bubble. But we wanted to sort of extract out those kinds of factors. So we sort of net out from those changing ratios what happens citywide. In the most simple way, and this is not the way an economist would present an equation, but it's a way we wanted to sort of present it so that people could understand what we're doing. We create this ratio for each census tract or block group in a community. It is essentially the ratio of sale price divided by income at an early point in time, inflated only by CPI. and then we extract out from that, and that's the piece not shown here. We extract out from that the citywide change. Here's a quick graphic that shows you why we care about extracting out that citywide change. In general, if you were to look at Philadelphia's home sale prices from the period 2000 through 2014, and these are indeed these are actual sales. These are not people's guesses of what their homes are worth in the census, but these are actual sale transactions. You can see that we're plotting the ratio of the sale prices to income on the y-axis or the vertical, and time on the x-axis or the horizontal. You can really see what influence that housing price bubble has on those ratios, because although they're trending up in general over time, you can see that quick inflation and quick reduction of those ratios. So in essence, what we do is when we do our ratios across the city, we're extracting out this line. Excuse me. The next slide is one where we take some sample areas in Philadelphia as a way of sort of thinking through a couple different common scenarios that you see for ratios of these displacement risk ratios over time in a place like the city of Philadelphia. Each line here represents an emblematic block group in a particular neighborhood. For Philadelphians, I'm going to use some neighborhood names that may be familiar with you, but for non-Philadelphians, I'm going to try and describe those neighborhoods a little bit. Let's focus our attention first on this blue line. This blue line is a block group in the neighborhood of Mayfair. Mayfair is in the lower northeast part of Philadelphia. It sort of is and has been for many, 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 many years a kind of predominantly white, working class, row home community. It has had periods of relatively greater strength or relatively greater weakness, but more or less, whoever lived in Mayfair in 2000 could certainly come back and live in Mayfair today, given the economics have not changed dramatically. Let's focus our attention now on this red line. This red line is an area called Francisville. And what you'll see is, firstly, Francisville is a sort of little part of Philadelphia to the east of the Art Museum area, to sort of the formal footprint of the Art Museum area. And although the Art Museum area's profile had changed dramatically decades ago, that area of Francisville had not really undergone much change. It had been sort of a low mod income, Hispanic community, lots of renters in there, but it had been really sort of oddly hanging in for quite some time, even as the markets around it had changed. But in as much as we're plotting the ratios here, what you'll see is it sort of hung in through the early 2000s. It saw a little bit of a boom or a pop-up in those ratios to return right at the beginning of the bubble. But notwithstanding the bubble, at this point, it then took off. And what you could say is pretty much anybody who lived in here at this point in time would feel the economic pressure of increasing home prices and the like. And investors who own rental properties would certainly see an appreciation in the value of their properties and likely pass that extra value through in the terms of higher rent. But in essence, that now has changed. And if you were to look at Francisville today and look at it 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, you would see it's a very different place. Lastly, we've got one block group here that's emblematic of Northern Liberties. Northern Liberties is a place that when we did this work first time back in the sort of 80s and 90s, it was a place that really folks had talked about was, the gentrifying neighborhood of Philadelphia. When the Art Museum was one of the first to change over, people were worried about Northern Liberties. The data, however, did not suggest that Northern Liberties was a place that was changing at that time. But more recently, for those familiar in Philadelphia, it's sort of in the eastern part of North Philadelphia. It tracks up maybe one sort of street that you would think runs up through the middle of it. Might be, let's say, 5th Street or 6th Street or something like that, which is a main north-south thoroughfare. And it'll cross over, and we'll be able to show you these on the map in a moment, from Girard on up a few blocks. But it's an area that has experienced just complete turnover. And what we see is these ratios have just trended up, with some bumps and the like in it without abatement from the early 2000 up and through now. So in essence, anybody who was there in 2000 is not likely there so much so anymore in 2014, or more appropriately, people who were like that. So if you were a teacher and you lived in Northern Liberties, it's not likely that a teacher today could come in and live in Northern Liberties given the economics of the place. So that's kind of the underlying logic. Important, and I could see from the, Joyce was kind enough to share the listing of folks who are on the call, and here are a real wide array of folks from different sort of interests and perspectives and touches on the housing market. You know, for us, it's really important to understand these different ideal types, let's say, of the trajectory of change of these ratios because, you know, what you would do in a Mayfair is different than what you would do in a Francisville, is different than what you would do in a Northern Liberties if you were thinking about, you know, making a set of programmatic investments or public policy interventions or what have you related to equitable development issues. Right, so now we're actually just going to run through some maps of the city of Philadelphia pretty quickly. Think of it almost like a flip book where what you're going to be looking for is change in the colors of those block groups that are being mapped. What I would say to you is that the way the maps are all structured, when you saw that Francisville line or that Northern Liberties line, that's sort of going to be showing up in the map as a place that goes from the lighter tones through the middle tones into those dark tones of brown. That's what it would look like on the map. And let me just caution you about one thing. I feel like the measurement works pretty well, except for a couple neighborhoods. And I don't know if you can see my pointer moving, but this area up in northwest Philadelphia where there's a clustering of brown block groups. I think that, you know, part of the issue of doing what we do, using the data that we use, is that particular communities, particularly that one out there in the Northwest, is one of the old, very wealthy communities of Philadelphia. So it's not like you're seeing lots of income per se in that place, but you're seeing great wealth. I think that what happens is our ratios are distorted a little bit by the fact that you're seeing not real high incomes in that place, although there is great wealth in that place. And I think that's a limitation both of the census data that we rely upon as well as the logic of what we're doing. But it is, I would say, a false positive. The rest of the work, I think, generally works out pretty well. So you might want to try and focus your attention if you were to sort of think about the epicenter of Philadelphia. And again, I'm not sure if you see my pointer or not moving, but if you sort of think about creating a north-south right down through the middle of the city and east-west sort of across the middle of it, you know, that's our downtown, and sort of focus your eyes, you know, maybe on a couple miles north-south, east, and, well, not east, that takes you over to Camden, but west over into West Philadelphia, where you'll see these places changing. So this is 2000, 2001, 2004 and 5. And notice, I'm going to bounce a little bit. This area right in here is that sort of Art Museum, Francisville area. This is University of Pennsylvania. Again, I hope you're able to see my cursor moving. And this area over here is that area that's kind of the Northern Liberties place. So it's 2004-5, 2008-9, and you're seeing the growth of brown in essence, right? And that's where those ratios are going higher. 12-13 and 14-15. So this area here went from largely yellow in that earlier time period to almost exclusively brown. This area filled in, this area pushed down, and we'll show you some drillings in a moment. So let's go into, okay, so I just got a text that people are not able to see the cursor. I would try and sort of play around with the controls a second, but I'm likely to lose everything, so I'll try and be more descriptive with my language rather than with the pointer. Okay, so now you're looking at a part of Philadelphia that's sort of south of Center City. You'll see much of it is displayed in those yellow tones, which means those ratios are relatively low. A couple things to note of. Hopefully you'll see on the eastern side of the map a diagonal street that comes down. That's known as Passyunk Avenue in Philadelphia. That's a place that over the course of time we've seen a lot of revitalization, not only on the residential side but on the commercial side. It has become probably competitively one of the best sort of few miles of restaurants that Philadelphia has. You've seen a lot of sort of commercial revitalization in the area, et cetera. So watch how the area changes. And if you could also focus your attention on a label that's sort of a little bit to the left of center that says Point Breeze, right in the middle of yellow. Watch how that area starts to be encroached upon by increasingly dark brown block groups. So 2000, 2001, 2, 8, 9, 12, 13. Okay, so let's go through that again. Little Point Breeze, which has been sort of a low mod income, historically African American area, you start to see the market pressure that encroaches down from the north, the market pressure of Center City, and then over from the east, which is that Passyunk Avenue. And let me just sort of run through that again, too. 1. And then you see, in essence, by the time we get to the latter part of this time period, Point Breeze is an area that is, feeling, hyper market pressure. And this is not, frankly, although, we're doing this sort of empirically with these maps, what we can tell you is that qualitatively, and certainly from the perspective of those who are working in the city of Philadelphia, yet that's a place where the market pressures have been really quite severe. People are surfacing the issues of increased tax burdens, conversion of rental properties to sales, infill of much larger and more significant and more expensive properties, et cetera. So now we're going to go, let me actually, before I move to Pittsburgh, across the state, let me ask if there are any questions that people have with respect to the information that we've presented so far. Is that something that we can do, Joyce?
Absolutely. If people have questions, they should, to unmute themselves, do *7. Again, to ask a question, do *7.
So I got one question from Mabel, I think it is. I'm having a hard time reading it. How can we justify the statement that similar rates of income and cost rise does not induce? No, I think you misunderstood. What I'm saying is when they rise together, that is not necessarily evidence of involuntary displacement, but where you see those ratios start to, separate. So when those prices start to move faster and more severely in the positive direction, then the income rises, allowed only to rise by inflation. That is where you do see the risk. So, Mabel, I'm sorry if I didn't make myself clear, but and I can understand your question if you didn't understand what I said, but that's not what we're trying to say. We're trying to say when those two things begin to move in different directions, income sort of slowly growing, but prices growing quite quickly, netting out the city effect, then that is evidence, or that is I think our pointer of involuntary displacement.
Hi, I actually asked that question. Hi.
You're an Ira too then, huh?
I am an Ira, yeah, hi.
Pleasure to meet you.
Meet you too. No, I think I did understand. My question is, hypothetically, let's say, a landlord evicts his tenants and doubles the rent, and people with income that are twice as high move in the next year. Wouldn't the ratio of income to sales or cost or whatever be flat if everything increases at the same rate? I'm just trying to work out the math, because when you set up a ratio, I'm just trying to figure out the different movements the numerator and the denominator can have to make sure all of your scenarios make sense.
Right. So that's your question in particular is exactly why we don't take in new income data, because new income data would cause that problem. But freezing your income at that early level, allowing it only to rise with inflation, gets us around that problem, right? Because those new higher income people indeed would create ratios that remain relatively constant. But leaving that income at that older level, again, allowed only to rise for CPI. Assuming a teacher's salary goes up a couple % a year, or a fireman's salary, whatever, that's why we do it that way, is if we didn't, we would experience the problem that you're mentioning.
Okay, so your income is fixed at the year 2000 then, except for by the CPI.
That's correct.
Okay, I think I did miss that part then.
So, but you raise another really important point, and it's one where I think we need to do some more, some more learning about what we're doing here, is that the ratio is really based on home prices. Now, we think that home prices and rents probably track reasonably similarly, but we don't have hard evidence about the way those things are working here. So we think that it's a way more direct measure of the risk for homeowners and a little bit less direct of a measure of the risk for renters. So ultimately, if we're able to sort of continue to work on this and build it out some more, we want to be able to try and figure out a way to build the rental corollary for this. All right, if there's no other questions right now, let's move into Pittsburgh, and we'll get another shot at some questions before it's over. We were able to acquire home sale data for the city of Pittsburgh as well, and one of the things that we wanted to do was with our colleagues at the Housing Alliance and the Data Collaborative, as they sort of expanded it to pull in Pittsburgh folks, was to really try and replicate the set of ratios in the city of Pittsburgh. So using the same methodology and the same kind of data, everything is done identically. What you're seeing now is a map of Pittsburgh, and what we are showing then is that set of ratios scaled basically the same way for the period 2000 through 2001. 2004 and 5, and we actually do these every year, but in the interest of time, we're just sort of skipping periods. 2008 and 9, and then 2012 and 13, and 2014, 15. And one of the areas, 14, 15, yeah. And one of the areas that we were particularly concerned about is that East Liberty area, and I want to sort of run back through and see if I can get you to pay attention to that. So go sort of to the upper northwestern part of Pittsburgh, and train your eye. There's a little bit of a green spot up there, which is a park, and train your eye on the block groups not too far from there, just south of there, in essence, right? Hopefully you're all there. And if you sort of get real close, you might be able to see the label East Liberty on the map, okay? So watch the areas around there, because that is a place that the city of Pittsburgh has expressed, and the residents and the advocates and everybody in the government of the city of Pittsburgh has expressed some concern about the nature and trajectory of its change, not that it's because of the implications that there may be for low-mod income people and residents there. So watch how those block groups go from largely light yellow to really fill in with higher ratios. So at this point, much of the area around that East Liberty section has become a place that in 2000, people would find it difficult to have essentially replicated themselves or hang in economically. This map, though, is an important one because it reflects some of the purposeful things that the city of Pittsburgh did around creating, maybe not enough, but creating affordable housing in an area that was changing in an economically more positive direction. So each one of those dots represents publicly subsidized affordable housing. And you should understand that the dots are colored by the period of affordability. Now, the pink ones, those are places that will lose their guaranteed affordability like any day now. But as you make your way through yellow, through the darker dots, those are places where the period of affordability will be extended over time. I notice somebody has a question.
Chris, it was from Chris Sandvik. He's stating it seems like there's quite a bit of insufficient data, especially in East Liberty.
There's what we do to make sure that we have a sufficiency of data to make the ratios relatively stable. So it sort of does two things. One is it creates a little bit of stability in the ratio, which is a good thing. The bad thing is it makes it a little bit less timely because you're rolling together 2 years' worth of data. But if we don't have 5 sales transactions in an area in 2 years, then we will suppress the ratio. So I have to dig in, and Colin and I will dig in a little bit to figure out exactly why that gray area exists within East Liberty. But that would be, generally speaking, that would be either that it's in a spot that's non-residential or if we don't have a sufficiency of sales in that time period. Okay. Carolyn is asking a question about what neighborhoods are around East Liberty. If you look at, again, up in sort of the northwestern part and look for northeastern part, I'm sorry. And I'd like to claim I fouled that up because I'm left-handed, but I'm not. It's northeast. And you look at one, there's a yellow spot that's got the name Garfield inside of it. That's right in and around where East Liberty is, and you'll see a cluster of colored dots in and around there. So it's sort of in the upper northeast section of the city. Hope that helps you, Carolyn, find the spot. Okay. So, one of the things...
Hi, this is Chris from Pittsburgh. Just real quickly, the reason I bring up the issue is particularly with our local discussion here, the core of East Liberty is the gray that we see here, and that's where the biggest discussion is and the biggest tension is about these issues of gentrification. There's been a tremendous amount of activity there in the past 5 years. So is there anything we can do to get the data to show that a little bit more? Because that dark that you're showing off to the west there is actually more like Friendship and Bloomfield, and that's scary in its own right because there actually isn't much development going on over there. That's just sales turnover. So that's all I just wanted to point out.
Yeah, so we'll go back and dig in some. This is, I would say that the maps are marked draft because our Pittsburgh stuff is not nearly as, I think, as nailed down as our Philadelphia stuff. So we will dig back in and see if there was some filter that was causing us to lose some of those sales, or if anything in particular was prompting that. But I think I'd like to pause for a moment now and just sort of talk a little bit about some of the points that we think are important to sort of grab out of this. Again, I want to sort of go back to an earlier point that I made that, frankly, this is not so much about directly measuring gentrification. There's way more sophisticated work. There's way better work, I think, that's out there that really gets to the complexity of what gentrification is and all those dimensions that we discussed. But again, our objective here was trying to get something that was a little more real time, firstly, or close to real time. We thought that it was really important to not have to create a huge, complicated approach, which takes a really long time and lots of resources to do. We've now sort of figured out how to do this, and Colin has become a whiz at this, where we've sort of taken in a couple of the New York boroughs, and it doesn't take all that much time to actually do it once you can get the data. So, I think that, again, this is sort of you have to realize that it is quite the pedestrian version of gentrification studies. It's not intended to be that, but it really is intended to create something that's reasonably actionable and reasonably real time for those people who are trying to sort of pay attention to the consequences that market change have on folks.
So, that's,
And now I see one other question about that. Somebody mentioned that section of East Liberty is very rental, and maybe that's why it's grayed out. We will dig in. That came from Gail Schwartz. So thank you, Gail. We will try and figure out if that's what's popular to have lost that area.
Home sale transactions that can.
North side?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
There's too much of the city, that's missing.
Like significant areas, because north side would be really interested to look at. Yep, Homewood South would be like that area. Like, there's no reason why they don't have sufficient access.
Hi, this is Joyce. Ira, are you? We have a little back. Does someone have a question? I guess.
Yep.
If not, Ira, do you want to?
No, I think we should sort of throw it open now. We had a couple other slides that talked a little bit about what the city of Pittsburgh has done over the course of time. And these came to us through the courtesy of a colleague in the Redevelopment Authority, the Urban Redevelopment Authority at Pittsburgh. But what they represent, and I'm not good enough to know all the individual activities of what they've done, so I'm a little hesitant to sort of go into them too much. But some of the activities that they've undertaken to ensure to a given extent, maybe not enough, but to ensure to some extent that the affordability is held on to as much as possible within that particular community. So I think what I'd rather do is, sort of stick on what we've had so far and then have some discussion about what we've done. I see something from Ed. Afternoon, Ed. In supporting redevelopment of a distressed neighborhood, you want property values to increase. How does the ratio filter out good increases in a market versus undesirable ones? And that's an interesting point, Ed. And I do think that we want to see, some bit of that rise. But in some ways, what the measure does to correct for that or to account for that is to essentially hold the block group harmless in its ratio if it trends along with the city. So if the city is rising 3, 4, 5% a year, we don't highlight the places that are rising at 3, 4, 5% a year because that's been sort of netted out of the ratio. And this is really trying to pick up on those ratios that are unusual with respect to what's going on in the area. And it's why you really have to do this in a local way. So the ratios that you might see uncorrected in a place like Boston or Detroit, frankly, on either end of that spectrum, or New Orleans where we just finished up some work. Those ratios will be very different, but if you sort of net out those citywide changes, that allows you to essentially not pay attention as displacement risk places if they're trending up as the city slowly trends up. And I think in some ways what you want to think about, and I'm going to pop back a few slides. I want to go back to those, both those trend lines. Right? It's the inflection points that are really, I think, really important to pay attention to. Both the inflection points, like if you look at that red line for Francisville, and then if we were to go into, for example, just watching the spatial change of the area in and around Point Breeze. So it's both that that statistical trend line as well as the way space begins to encroach. The other piece I think is really important that we believe about this work is markets, if you're going to measure them on a regular and recurring basis, really do change geographically slow, right? So if you were to look at that Point Breeze area, and if you were to spend some time sort of studying that place, what you'll see is that change has really occurred on a block-by-block basis. If you do the analysis at the block group level as we've done, you're able to detect that much sooner than if you do it at a tract level, a census tract level, which is, generally speaking, 5 to 6 times both the spatial, physical spatial size of the area as well as the population and households within the area. The tracts tend to sort of mush all that together and not allow you to see that, that market is creeping down from Center City and across from the east side of South Philly onto Little Point Breeze. Little Point Breeze would look unchanged if we were using tract boundaries, and the areas around it would be way more blunted in terms of your ability to see those changes, were you to not be able to look at that geographically refined place. Ed also asks about questions about places where you see good increases occurring. If you were to sort of go back to the citywide map of Philadelphia, there are a variety of neighborhoods in Philadelphia, for example, up in the northwest, not in the far northwest that I pointed out as that false positive, but sort of a little lower down. Those are communities called, Mount Airy, East and West Mount Airy, where you've seen some, generally speaking, not sort of meteoric rises, but more tempered rises that are going along with the citywide averages. I would suggest that there are parts of the northeast of Philadelphia, up in the northeast, that wing of the city up there, where the rises have been more tempered and consistent with the rises of the city. So those might stand as some examples. And frankly, though, I think that, thinking about the Mayfairs of Philadelphia, what kinds of things could you do? Let's go back to that chart again for a second. And this is really what drove a lot of the discussions of the data collaborative. When you see a chart like this, this one's a little bit downward sloping, which gives us some pause. But what are the things that you could do to sort of look at that blue line over the course of time? And what kinds of interventions could sort of pick that up from its slight downward trajectory and make it a stable, decent, high-quality, advantageous place for people to live? I'll add one other piece of the thought process for us, and that is, if you put your fair housing lens on some of this work, if you think about like a Point Breeze, that is a largely African-American, long-time African-American community. That is an area that the data suggests is changing. Now, unquestionably, there are some families in there who've been able to avail themselves of that rising property market and be able to sort of realize some gain on the homes that they've owned. Some not, right? And so the question becomes, from a fair housing perspective, you could deal with, and we do all the time, trying to figure out what to do when people are no longer able to sort of hang into a community. But wouldn't it be better to make your investments that would allow people to stay in place in the communities that they've chosen and be in those places as they've gotten more economically and in some ways, in a variety of different ways, better places. So there's better access to commercial stuff. It's probably a safer place today now than it was 5-10 years ago. Certainly, the streetscapes have improved and all those other things. So, if you think about the nature of how that place has changed, wouldn't it be, from a fair housing perspective, a much better alternative and a cost-efficient alternative to help people stay in place as the area around them has changed, rather than try to deal with where are they going to go next? And the little bit that people know about displacement is people don't go far. They go a few blocks multiple times over the course of their life. Again, wouldn't it be better to just let them sort of figure out a way to have them hang in there and avail themselves of those positive benefits? So we're not hearing any more questions or seeing any more typed in. Either I've bored, offended, or put the remainder of the people to sleep. So we don't have anything else that we would like to say other than, we were really trying to create something that's simple and replicable and doesn't take, a boatload of resources and a lot of super technical capabilities, but something that communities could almost do on their own, and sort of see that in tandem with other things that they're doing, so that they can really get a grip on where there are risks or market pressures that might be evoking displacement risk. Okay, Gail asked a question about where we get home sale data from. Most places you will get it from a recorder of deeds. Philadelphia has its Office of Property Assessments and its Board of Revision of Taxes. There you get the actual sale transactions. New York is terrific. They have open data, so you can get like 10 years of sale transactions or 8 years of sale transactions. Pittsburgh, we were able to get the data. We were actually able, in large part, to use data that we've had from other projects that we've done there. So different places, it's different, but the first stop to my mind would be like a recorder of deeds or a property assessment office. We've done this work in Jacksonville, Florida. Their property assessment office has every transaction going, back for 15 or so years. So the nice thing about using sales data is, among all the different kinds of data that you'd probably want to use, A, it's a terrific indicator because it is the actual market, and B, most sales in most places are recorded, and so it leaves of data elements. It leaves a real good artifact for you to use, generally available. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Ira. I was just wondering, are there any, I'm going to unmute all the lines if people have comments.
The conference has been unmuted.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Ira or Colin? We will be sending the PowerPoint out after today, and I assume if Ira or Colin, is your contact information on the last slide?
Yes, I believe it is.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. We'll sign off a little early. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you very much to Ira and Colin for getting this together for us. It's very informative. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.